Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon. Yeah. Okay, I'll just be brief. I'm just giving you a brief overview of the CSR contributions to maximizing the value of industry waste. The previous speaker from HP, I guess, spoke about waste being a valuable resource and so on. I guess I want to demonstrate that here at CSR, we also recognize that there's value in this waste, and I'll just give you some sampling of that type of work. Okay, so at the CSIR, we undertake independent contract research, specialist advisory support to government, industry, and society. And this supports decision-making, policy development, and strategy formulation, and facilitates South Africa's transition towards a green economy, embracing the principles of waste hierarchy and of a circular economy. So research on industrial waste at the CSR is based along 5 research themes. One is integrated waste management, waste and resource economics, waste innovation, both technological and non-technological, and then providing waste data and information, and finally developing new value chains from organic waste. Yes, we do recognize that waste is a valuable resource. It's estimated that the resource value in South Africa here exceeds $25.2 billion per annum. Rands per annum, which is quite significant. It's almost 1% of our GDP. And if you look at figures in 2011, recycling 10% of this waste unlocked about 8.2 billion per year worth of resources into South African economy. But that still leaves a significant amount, 17 billion, that it can still be resourced from this thing. Now these are just conservative figures, so we're based looking at only 13 potentially recyclable waste in South Africa. If you include all the others, 1, 2, I think the numbers are even quite higher than that. However, there are challenges now in beneficiating industrial waste. For example, the waste is often not segregated at source, resulting in contamination and loss of value. It's expensive to transport, especially if it has a high hazard rating. High-tech solutions are required to manage this waste. Also, too, high skills levels are required to manage, operate, and the facilities responsibly. And then in some cases, we have large volumes of relatively low hazard waste, which is far from the markets. So transportation becomes an issue. In many cases, they are just transporting only water and so on, so that's not effective. So transport costs are often limiting factors to reuse or recycling these materials. And lastly, there are legislative barriers to reuse and recycling of the waste. You'll be surprised, for example, in the forest industry, when you cut down the tree, you can remove the branches and so on and leave them in the forest to be used. But if you take that tree and take it to the mill and then you chip it, those waste chips now, they become a hazardous waste. You cannot transport them back to the mill because the government considers them to be a hazardous waste because the pH now is around 6 or so. That doesn't make sense. So how can you beneficiate waste in South Africa? In this case, you can beneficiate rather 2 ways, looking at the supply side and also on the demand side. On the supply side, we're looking at investment in infrastructure for collection of the waste, creating entrepreneurial opportunities for collecting this waste, and implementing policies and incentives to encourage beneficiation of this waste. On the demand side, we can have innovative uses of recycled materials usage in South Africa, development of innovative new high-quality products from the waste, and also biorefinery technologies. So in the next few slides now, I'll show you how the CSR R&D activities are involved in some of these topics here. First, let's start off looking at waste in the forest products industry. You will find that the pulp and paper industry and the forestry processing industry, they produce tons and tons of waste. Indeed, the yield extracted from a tree, the value extracted from the tree is only about 47%. In other words, if I start off with a ton of tree, I produce my pulp and paper, 47% goes into making the paper. The rest of the material is lost as waste. So the waste can be in the form of sawdust, sludge, bark, and fly ash, and so on. So in other words, the majority of the tree is lost and not being used usefully. And we are saying this is not environmentally sustainable. That's not acceptable there too. Additionally, too, if you look at it, there's a production decline and job losses in the forestry industry. This slide here just shows production of pulp and paper grades on a worldwide scale. In North America, production increased up to about 2008, and ever since then, there's been a steep decline. The same type of trend is observed in Europe. Peaked around 2008, and there's been a steep decline. Then if you look at South Africa, we are not immune to that too. If you look at the printing and writing grades, they also peaked around 2007, and ever since then, there's been a steep decline and so on. So in other words, this industry, the forest product industry, the pulp and paper industry in particular, they are in decline and they are suffering a lot. Some of the reasons, for example, if you look at the mills here in South Africa, they say this was in response to difficult market conditions and the continuing rise in input energy, water, and fiber costs and so on. Indeed, the manufacture of pulp and paper in South Africa, well, worldwide really, it's like I say, it's very, very inefficient, but also too, it's very, very expensive. The pulp and paper industry is energy intensive and water intensive. Two things that are in short supply here in South Africa. Now, as a result of this decline, decline in the usage of pulp and paper products and so on, there's been a number of mills that have shut down worldwide and also too here in South Africa. We know that mills in Cape Craft, they closed, Together, they're downsized, and the Maybank, they're downsized, so it's a big industry, it's a big problem, really, that we need to deal with. So, as I mentioned earlier on, currently the forest structure technology is wasteful and has limited products. As shown in this slide here, you start off with the trees, and then before they're processed into lumber mills, you need to remove the bark, the waste, and so on, the shavings, all that goes to waste. If you have pulp and paper, in addition to removing this, in the processing itself of making pulp and paper, there's tons and tons of sludge that's generated that too. That also needs to be dealt with and so on. So currently, most of these things here are disposed of by landfilling or disposal into the receiving waters, depending where you are located and so on. Mills along the coast and so on, you find that they have a 5-kilometer pipeline going under the sea, and that's how they dispose of their waste and so on. Obviously, we agree that this is not sustainable, it's not acceptable. We would like to have better ways of doing it. So by doing all this here, we're only extracting only 47% value from the tree. This is a highly inefficient use of a natural resource. So how can we revitalize this industry? And we believe that this can be done through biorefinery technologies. I hope you heard the word biorefinery before and so on. So what is a biorefinery? It's a facility that integrates biomass conversion processes and equipment to produce fuels, power, and chemicals from biomass. The previous speaker from Sithole explained the process, how they produce these different types of chemicals and so on. What you are saying is those type of chemicals, they can also be produced from wood biomass. Well, I guess it makes sense if you look, where did coal and oil originate from? They originated from wood anyway, right? So it makes sense and so on. But the only difference that I'm sorry to Sithole, I'm saying, one way is environmentally sustainable, the other one is but anyway, the main thing we say maybe one day we'll run out of oil, whereas with trees you can always plant new trees and so on. You harvest the tree, you plant a new one and so on. And I know some people will say no, but cutting down trees leads to deforestation, but that does not apply to South Africa. This is because in South Africa we're using plantation trees. So we cut down the tree, we plant another one. We cut down the tree, so it's a sustainable way of processing the paper industry and the forest industry. So we don't have to worry about deforestation. Use as much paper as you want, there's no problem. So biorefinery technologies now, they are the way to go in this respect. So with the biorefinery technologies now, the idea is to focus on that waste material. Remember I said 47% yield, the 50% is lost. So if we focus on that waste, what value can we extract from that material? And indeed, if you look at it carefully, you'll find that you can obtain high value materials out of that. Things like the fibers and the fillers, they can be used, for example, making biocomposites. Or you can extract high value specialized chemicals out of it. Or you can take that biomass and use it for bioenergy. And if this is done properly indeed, you'll find that your tree utilization can exceed over 90%. and there'll be no more waste to be disposed of. You don't have to worry about the disposal of these things and so on. So that way, we are producing the idea is you still produce your normal product, but on the side, you take the waste materials, apply the biorefining technologies, and then produce all these diversified products, which is a very good way of doing it. Just to illustrate some examples there that we are working on. We are working with sawdust. If you ever visit a sawmill, from a distance, depending where you are, in this case it was a KZN, it's all green all around. And as soon as you approach a mill, you see all these mountains. From a distance, you think they're hills and all that. It's only when you get closer to find that it's sawdust. It's piled and piled up on the side. That's because that's the only way they can deal with. It's too much for landfilling when they cannot even do that. Some of it is used for burnt for energy and so on, but there's too much they cannot burn out of it. So it's all piled up on the side. So this is, it's not good. For one thing, it's an environmental hazard. If ever there was a fire, it could be a fire hazard. Secondly, on windy days, if you're breathing this thing here, it's not good for your health and so on. So we believe that something has to be done and so on. So in this case, if you look at the structure of a wood is what's called hemicellulose, cellulose, lignin, and extractives. So we can extract the hemicellulose. If you are making pulp and paper, all you're interested on is the cellulose. The rest of the material is considered as waste. So if you can take now the sawdust and extract the material, say with hot water or slightly acidic materials, you are removing these materials called hemicelluloses. And one of the major components in that is xylose. And then this xylose can be converted into xylitol. And xylitol is a low calorific sweetening agent. It's very good, say, for the people with diabetes, since they cannot tolerate sugar, but they can use this type of material. Or if you are looking at weight control and so on, you can use xylitol. Currently, xylitol, if you buy it here in South Africa, if you go to shops, it sells for about 150 rand per kg, whereas sugar is about 34 and so on. But the problem is there's no local production of xylitol. It's all imported. So we're saying, why can't we localize this industry by using a waste material and producing a very highly valuable material like that? Another example here is if looking at the pine sawdust waste. Pine sawdust waste is full of these lipophilic extractives and these pine oils. So you can extract these materials and use them in a variety of things as cleaning agents and polishing agents and so on. That same thing with this. There's no local production of this material. There was a local production of it until up to about 2011. There was a mill, Sapi mill in Tugela. They were producing this as a byproduct, but they switched their process, so there's no more tall oil here in South Africa now. It's all imported. And as you can see in the slide here, one company tells us that they import 20 tons of this every 3 weeks, and it sells like hotcakes. So there is a market. We believe there is a market of that too. So why not localize this type of a thing so that we can have it being produced locally? So in terms of the biorefinery technologies now, it all depends on what you are making and the quantities and so on. Some of the technologies are suitable, say, for SMMEs, or some can be suitable on a large scale. It all depends really on what you're working with. So some of the technologies that we are developing here, we believe that they can be suitable for uptake by SMMEs. In South Africa, there's about 400 sawmills, so they're scattered all over the place. So in some cases, it may not make sense for them to produce them on a large scale like that here. But we believe that maybe we can develop an extractor on a mobile unit that can be going from plant to plant and collecting this. Then it can be all provided at a central place to be a better place for doing that. So anyway, that's one way that we are looking at. Now, you may ask yourself a question now, if after we've extracted these materials, there's still the fibers remaining. So what do you do with that? So we are saying, yes, depending. If you are interested in energy, you can take those fibers, you can pellet them to make pellets for bioenergy. But we believe that there is a better way of doing it. You can convert them now into something called the NanoCrystalline Cellulose. I know some of you know about nanotechnology, but I don't know if you're aware that there's also nanotechnology in the forestry industry. If you look at the cellulose structure, it's comprised of the crystalline and non-crystalline regions and so on. You can use strong acid and break up those non-crystalline regions and to extract these crystalline fibers. And the slide here shows you this technology was developed in Canada a few years ago for producing this type of things. The interesting thing now about the nanocrystalline fibers is their properties. The tensile strength of these fibers is stronger than that of stainless steel. So I'm telling you, something from wood is stronger than steel. It's mind-boggling to believe in that too. So, but yes, indeed, it's that too. Also, too, the materials under wet conditions, so on, they have an iridescent colors. They can be doing that. So, in terms of applications now of this type of thing, the world is quite open and so on. These nanocrystalline cellulose, they can be used in a whole slew of variety of materials, things like in the paint industry, making films, making adhesives, and hydrogels and so on. So in our lab now, we're developing applications for this type of things and so on. For example, in the last one here, the hydrogels. If you take a plastic, say polyacrylic acid, add 4% of this material, it changes its properties. It becomes a hydrogel. And then if you immerse it in water, this plastic expands 98% by imbibing water and so on. So that's how the hydrogel is. You only need only small amounts, not large quantities and so on. And it's big enough to change the properties significantly. So high performance composites and so on, that's one way that we believe can be used to do this type of thing there too. Now, production of nanocrystalline cellulose, there's only about 4 or 5 companies worldwide that are producing this type of materials. And currently the way they do it, they use it for producing these things, they're using chemical pulp, which is produced from wood. This is a highly purified pulp. Normally pulp goes into making pulp and paper, but this is a specialized pulp that goes into high markets like pharmaceutical grade or food packaging and so on. So it's a very, very expensive pulp. So they take that pulp, treat it with acid, and then they produce the nanocrystalline cellulose. Now that pulp sells for about $1,200 a ton. And in production of that pulp from wood, remember before I said the yield was 47%, but production of this pulp, the yield is 35%, it's even lower. And then in their process for producing a nanocrystalline cellulose, the yield there is only 15%. So with us now, we've developed a technology where we're taking only the waste material, say sawdust. We go straight from sawdust to produce nanocrystalline cellulose. We don't go through a pulping step, a process step. So it's all a one-step process like that. And currently, the waste is free, so it's free. And good news is yield is 40%. So we're producing nanocrystalline cellulose at a much higher yield than in the current methodology, and we're using only a free product. Currently, nanocrystalline cellulose sells for about $1,000 per kilogram. So it is a very, very high value material. And like I say, we're working on this, and we're working on developing industrial collaborations to look at this thing. So to summarize here in this thing here, and I say now, those mountains and mountains of sawdust and so on, they will be gone if we implement biorefinery technologies now. We can use them to extract the sugars, or we can extract the pine oils, and then after that, the fibers remaining, use them to produce nanocrystalline cellulose. And then if this is done, there's no more waste, and our tree utilization has increased from 47% to 95%, and there's nothing to be concerned about the disposal of these things there too. Another work they're looking here is a beneficiation of mill sludge. I mentioned that the pulp and paper industry, they produce one of their waste, it's sludge, and this sludge has to be disposed of. So it's a headache for mills. Indeed, one mill tells us that they spend 20 million rands per annum managing and disposing of this waste. So if you take this sludge and then analyze it, you find that it varies depending on from mill to mill. I mean, this is just an example here. In this particular case, organic concentration is 60% and inorganic is 40%. So the inorganic is from the ash, because in the pulp and paper making process, you're adding fillers, the clays, the calcium carbons, and so on. This is what contributes to that inorganic component. So we believe that with biorefinery technologies now, that inorganic fraction can be used to make building materials, for example, cement bricks. And the organic portion, we can use it to produce a nanocrystalline cellulose, and we can also use it to produce a polymer plastics, things like polylactic acid and so on can be produced for that type of mill. So this way, by doing this diligently and so on, that sludge, there's no more sludge disposal problem. It's all be used up in the process. Another example that we're working on too is the valorization of poultry waste. In this case, we're looking at the chicken waste. If you look at the slide here, just show you the life cycle of a chicken. I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But anyway, from the chicken to the time that it's ready for harvesting and so on, it's about 45 days or so. And in the processing itself, you are producing the material, but look at the last portion of the slide here, 8 to 10% of a chicken is feathers. I don't know, have you ever thought about what happens to these feathers and so on to do that? So worldwide, 20 billion pounds of feathers are produced per year. In South Africa, it's 528 million pounds of these materials. So disposal of this is a problem. You can use incineration, but this problem is, as you mentioned, as we heard earlier on about incineration, it's not good for the environment. Some of it can be used as animal feedstuffs, but problem is the nitrogen content there is not suitable for such things, so it's not good for like that. And then landfilling, that's the only alternatives commonly used, but there's a shortage of space, greenhouse gas emissions. Also too, the hazardous material. These are biological materials. There's microbes growing in it, so it's a hazardous waste and so on. And also too, as you heard too, there's regulations coming to ban landfilling. So we believe that instead of doing this now, what can we do about the chicken feathers? If you look at the chemistry of chicken feathers, you find that its majority is keratin, 91% keratin. There's a little bit of lipids and 80% of the keratin is the same type of material that you find in our nails and also too in rhino horns. That's the same type of material. So it's a protein type of material. So it's so in this case, we can extract this material and use it for something else. I remember Linda, she suggested that why don't you take this keratin and use it to produce rhino horns that we can then market. Maybe save our rhinos that way, maybe that would be one way to look at it there too. So, but anyway, we are looking at other more high-tech ways of doing it there too. So we have developed technologies now for extracting the keratin. Pure keratin sells for about 2,000 rand per gram. So it's a very, very high value material. But the problem is you can extract keratin, but the purification step, that's what the problem is and so on. That's what makes it more difficult and so on. But we have developed technologies now where we think we've got a good quality and so on that too. So we have the keratin now powder, and now we're now developing applications to say what you can use it and so on. For example, you can do electrospinning to form different types of fabrics or materials and so on that can be used there for that too. And we believe by looking at the structure of keratin and so on, it can be mixed with other things to produce, for example, tissue engineering for scaffolding products and so on that can be used for that kind of things. And also too can be used to make biocomposites and indeed textiles, because these are fibers, they're fibrous materials, natural fibers, so you can use them to make textile materials. Indeed, we are working now on producing super absorbent textile materials for doing that too. And the chicken feathers, if you look at their properties and so on, they are very, very insulating. They don't conduct electricity and they don't burn, so they can be used in producing things, electronics and so on. And then cosmetics, as I mentioned, that the keratin can be used there too. And then, of course, there's fillers in clothing and so on for warm clothing. It can be used for doing that too. So that was just a few examples of what we do here at the CSIR. But in this case, we do all this. That's because we have a facility here at the CSIR. If you look at where we are in the national system of innovation, you find that we are located in between fundamental research and industrial applications. So we do have facilities now for uptaking development or industrial experiments from the lab scale and upscaling them to be ready for applications. So to summarize then, we are developing, we have expertise now for maximizing the value of industry here at the CSIR. And this is achieved by development of policies, governances, and best practices regarding waste management. Also to development of opportunities for technological and social innovations in waste management. And then development of waste resource economics. In this case, we have the economic instruments. We can determine the true costs and benefits of waste management. And we also provide waste information management. In this case, quantification and modeling of waste streams, studying human behavior with regards to waste recycling and waste picking. And also too, I'm happy to say too, by hosting the implementation of South Africa's 10-year waste research development and implementation roadmap. And this is aimed at guiding R&DI and public and private sector investment in solid waste R&DI. So Linda here, she is running that program. If you have any questions on it, so on, I'm sure she'll be able to help you with that too. Now, we have a facility in Durban. It's called the Biorefinery Industry Development Facility. This is a courtesy of the CSIR and the DST. They funded the equipment. So we built this facility. This is a world-class facility, central to the major biomass in the region. It has highly trained specialist technical experts for advisory and technology development. And we have pilot plant equipment to enable us to upscale these technologies to be ready for uptake by industry. We also have advanced and unique analytical equipment for characterization of biomass and the products. And we are also heavily involved in human capital development to meet industry needs. And now we have a growing network of partnerships and collaborations to implement these biorefinery technologies. So you guys from industry and so on, you are welcome to come and use our facility to develop and expand these biorefinery technologies there too. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Prof.